So we go get a wheelbarrow and go get some compost. And then we're going to make a planting mix. We use nothing but compost. And then we actually put other nutrients in it. But what we do with that is we work it into the soil. And indeed, one time last year we looked at some cucumbers and they were dying. And people were trying to figure it out. And then I looked and saw that somebody hadn't worked it into the soil. And they were dying because there were way too many salts. And they were just fried by far too much nutrition. So if you do a planting mix, you would use something like good compost and nutrients like alfalfa meal, azomite, feather meal. If you're still using feather meal, there was an article last year about the levels of heavy metals in feather meal, which kind of like, I'm not buying it anymore. We've got some to use up, but I backed off of that now. But seaweed, ingredients like that. Pasteurized chicken manure, Symphony or Harmony are two varieties. Those are all things you would add into a planting mix. We'll add some of that into this, a starting mix. We're going to add some of this into some of that also into our planting mix. But the difference is we're going to cut this compost with some pond muck soil that we have, so that it's not quite so strong. Because we're not going to mix it. In the lasagna bed, we're going to make a little hole in the lasagna bed, as if it were a pot. We're going to fill it with the planting mix and put the plant right in that. That's why we don't want pure compost, because that would be too strong.
This is compost you made?
This is compost we made. It was made from horse manure, cow manure. Cow manure had loads of corn stalks in it. Taproot Dairy has it. You can get truckloads of it. If you're interested, talk to me. The more people that buy it, when he's got it, the cheaper it gets. He charges, if I have enough people buying it, he charges $60 an hour to deliver it, and nothing for the manure. No mix have I ever found compost better than this. It cranks incredibly. There's no wood added to it for bedding. The bedding is the corn stalks, and those are big. They throw them in whole. The cows chop them up with their feet. The pile breathes incredibly and runs hot forever. It's the best stuff I've ever seen. And this spring, I didn't have enough people for them, and they had to spread it on the field. You would have rather hauled it off and gotten paid for it. Not that the field doesn't deserve it.
What was that farm?
That's Taproot Dairy. But really, if you had to go to Silo, it's going to be 3 hours going. But you know what? $180 for that big a load of that good of stuff is probably still a good deal. I mean, it's a tandem dump truck packed. It's a solid 16 to 18 yards of stuff that's going to compost incredibly. That's going to sink. That's going to break down if you compost it well to about 35% of its original volume. You're still getting like.
You have to turn it.
Well, if you get it, and if somebody has got a front end loader, and they can move it for you once, you wait for it to start heating up, and you put it on pipes, drainage pipes that you get from Lowe's. You invert them so that the holes are pointing up, and you make sure the ends stick out. And what happens is, because there's so much corn stalk in there, you create a chimney effect. And it'll run for weeks and weeks. Now the inside is going to be very well composted. The outside, there you got to do hand labor, take it off and pile it up again on top of those pipes. But it should be way reduced how much you have to do by that. It's a strategy that I think is possible. I mean, large-scale composting without a machine, you better be into a lot of aerobic exercise. But this actually means that it's just a little bit of aerobic exercise and a lot of good strategy. And you can get a whole bunch of well-composted stuff. That center of that pile is going to be thoroughly composted. Now, by the time it finishes, it's still going to want to cure. But you'll have gotten processed to further reduce pathogens. Many, many times over. You won't have those weed seeds. You will have good stuff. If you use it right away, be careful. Work it in well. It's going to be way too high in salts, and it could easily burn your plants. If you give it a little bit of time, it'll mellow out and be spectacular. And if you can, we have an aerated bin system, and Juan over there, our star composter, who gets out there and turns it whenever he needs to with the front end loader, and the result is this, which is darn good compost. So Juan and Marshall, this is the compost with the char in it, right?
That's your compost with the char. That's the finished cured product. This is the composted manure from Grandview, which is still finished.
Yep.
It hasn't cured as long as that. Right. That's in the bucket.
So this stuff here was turned once a week with an actual compost turner. We had Andrew come out and turn it. So it was that manure turned once a week. You know, so if you could figure out a way to turn it even once a week, but a pile like that, not unless you got a bunch of teenagers who really want some money and are working out for the football team, you know, so that they're willing to do that kind of work.
And for how many weeks?
At least 3. At least 3. And if you can turn it for at least 3 weeks and then let it age, it'll be darn good. If you can turn it longer, the longer the better until it doesn't heat. You know? And with this stuff here, that is a long time. This stuff will heat and heat and heat. Do you remember how long we had to turn that pile?
It's been a long time.
I mean, it was still heating up 6 to 8 weeks after we got it. You know?
Yes, it's been a long time.
It has that much in it. So then it makes, I mean, we test it, see how well it does. We do a carbon nitrogen test, and our goal used to be below 11, and now we're getting below 9.
We had a 917, and we've had a little lower than that.
Yeah.
And each week that we bring this over to use it for amending our beds, it gets a little bit more and more cured. Like this here is from maybe 2 weeks ago, as opposed to this from today. It's a little bit, just gets a little more and more cured the longer you give it.
Time will do it once you get that PFRP. You know, that PFRP means you've gotten rid of pathogens, you've gotten rid of weed seeds. Then you can just get. So if you buy this once, right, you can get it to heat up. Then you might have to use it before it's really well finished, but you'll still have a bunch left, right? And then you buy it again and get it to heat up. Then you can actually probably wait for time to finish it, and you can get it to be like this. And that's good.
You got to load in July, and you can use it next spring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just let it sit.
Yeah. Well, try and get it to heat up once, so you don't have those weed seeds, you don't have any pathogens. So really, pathogens aren't going to be much of an issue by a year later. You know, they don't, the kinds of things that make us sick do well in our guts, and eventually they're going to just be done anyway. But if you're organic, you have to hit PFRP to use it, unless you want to say that you're using it as manure. And I'd actually recommend, if you're in the biz, if you're selling food, that you always treat it like raw manure if you've not hit processed to further reduce pathogens, which means over 132 turns at least 5 times, you know, in 2 weeks if you're doing windrows. If you have it in a bin system that's closed, then it's 3 days, because they're assuming the whole, every bit of it gets to that temperature. Okay, now we're gonna...
If one were to create a big compost pile with one of these trucks, how, like, your process of turning it, you're just like moving what's inside outside?
Yep. Yeah.
How often should we be doing that?
Just once. Just once to get the outside to cook too. I mean, you could do it. Ideally, you should do it as much as you possibly can. But in reality, once is going to be a huge job. You know?
Yeah.
If you can do it more than once, if you can do it every time the temperature starts to go below 132 degrees, you'll make the best compost you can. You know? If every time it gets, you know, once you turn it, you should easily get up to like 140, 150, maybe even hotter. If it then goes below 132, which is the magic number for it being legal heat, then you turn it, right? It'll go right back up again. You know, if you then see it going below 132 again and turn it again, it'll go right back up again.
Okay.
Eventually, it will stop going back up. And when it stops going back up, then there's no reason to turn it. Then aging is all you need.
And how long do you then age it, Patryk?
At least 6 weeks, but the longer the better. A year is ideal. You know? But do know that as it ages, your yardage drops. You know, it gets smaller. We had a friend who bought a whole lot of mackerel compost for a project that didn't happen, and it took a long time to sell off what he couldn't use. His bags were getting smaller as they sat. They just keep working, you know. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Okay, now we're gonna get some compost. But actually, some of it was made later, but it's all been sitting since September. Oh no, we mixed it in December, I guess, right? Yeah. That's probably enough of that because that's really strong. Now we're gonna get some soil. Okay, so what we have here is pond muck. I lucked out and happened to be friends with somebody that was repairing a pond, and we got many, many truckloads of pond muck delivered. This stuff here is 8% organic matter. It's very high because it's all that leaves falling into a pond and rotting.
And a bunch of rocks.
And a bunch of rocks, you know?
You want some of this in there?
Yep, I sure do. Sometimes you have to take the rocks with the soil. We'll do it. We're going to add to this wheelbarrow 1 cup of azomite. This is way below application rates, but we use it all the time. And so we just use a little bit at a time, and then we make sure and pay attention to our soil tests and make sure we're not getting out of whack. You don't want to use this on a windy day in a place that's windy, because you'll lose a lot of it and you'll probably get it in your lungs, which is not a good idea. Okay. We also use seaweed. It's real expensive, and we don't use very much at all. We'll use about 1/2 cup for this wheelbarrow. It's basically just about dynamism for the microbes. Just a little bit of nutrient mixed through. We'll mix it through very well. It's very easy to overdo this stuff, and you get salt burn if you do. It's also very expensive, so you go real easy with it. Okay. This next one should be alfalfa meal. Yes, and this we're much more generous with. This one I'll probably put about 1 quart in this mix.
1 quart?
Yep. Maybe a little more than that. 4 big heaping cups. This also is really good for the microbes, but it also is a nitrogen feed. And there's a fair amount of mineral too, because alfalfa goes nice and deep. And the next one is totally dependent on what else you have, how much of it you use. I think we got a pretty high nitrogen mix for what we're going to be using for our lasagna beds, so we don't need very much of this at all. This is a product of the industrial food system. It's you know, if you want to produce or somebody likes that, that's Battery Chicken House. That's the bedding from there, which they have processed in a way to make pellets. And when they make the pellets, they're going over 180 degrees in temperature. So Armory allows it. It hasn't been composted, but there's no pathogen issues because it's been pasteurized. It's really pretty powerful stuff, and microbes love it. Because I'm not really worried about nitrogen here, probably 2 cups is more than enough. For the amount of stuff that's in here, that's really not a lot of nutrients, but it'll be plenty. Plenty for what we're doing. And actually I said 2 cups, because I think about it, probably 1.5 cups is enough. Once we mix this, I might go back and top it off with a little bit more soil. It'll be easier to mix like this. You can mix from the other end if you want there, Glenn.
Is that straight manure?
The chicken stuff?
Yeah.
It's actually the bedding. So it's not straight manure, but it's got a very high, high nitrogen and potassium.